We're looking at complex numbers in grade 12 alpha. Ons gaan na komplekse getalle kyk. In grade 10, we talked about complex numbers. We said that it consists out of a real part and the imaginary part. Now in grade 12, we're going to rewrite this complex number in different forms. We have 3 different forms. Ons het 3 verskillende notasies. My eerste een is my reghoekige vorm, my rectangular form. That's the one we know. Dit is my a plus be, my gewone vorm, x dot I, y, my normal one, my rectangular form. But now I can also rewrite this in polar form, in pool vorm. En dit gaan wees r cos theta plus e sin theta, r cos theta plus I sin theta, which we're going to abbreviate as the word cis, r cis theta. So in plaas van daarvan om elke keer r cos theta plus e sin theta uit te skryf, gaan ons net praat van cis. And we also get the exponential form, or e to the power of I theta, in ook my exponentiële vorm. So just a side note, this value e, Euler's number, we're going to do a whole chapter 2, about this number, about e and about ln. So ons gaan 'n hele hoofstuk nog oor hierdie getal e doen, nie te veel nou oor hom worry nie. So for now you just need to know that e is actually a number, just like pi is a number. We know pi is 3,14, something. E is the same as 2,718, and so on. So it's actually just a constant value to the power of I theta. Good. So what does this mean? It means that all 3 of these are actually exactly the same. Reghoekige vorm, poolvorm en eksponensiële vorm is almal gelyk aan mekaar, net verskillende maniere om dit te skryf. Rectangular form, polar form en exponential form are the same thing. If we go to plot this graphically, we know from grade 10 that I can use my x-axis for my real numbers, my y-axis for my imaginary numbers, and I can go plot this value. So as ek die getal 3 plus 2e gehad het, dan kan ek hom visueel gaan op my asstelsel gaan teken, 3 op my reële as en 2 op my imaginêre as, so I can go and plot this complex number as a coordinate. So if I were to plot this as a coordinate, and I would draw my triangle, where my 3 is going to be my x value, my 2 is going to be my y value, we can go get r, we can go get the radius or the hypotenuse of that line. Good. This also means that we can write x in terms of r and theta. So in terme van r en theta kan ek nou vir x gaan skryf. Ons weet dat cos theta gelyk is aan a op s, my aangrensende sy op my skynsy. Cos theta is equal to a over h, and we can go solve for x, getting the r alone. Same concept, to get sin theta, to get y alone, we're going to say r sin theta. So we can get y alone and we can get x alone. So having x plus iy is the same as x is actually r cos theta and y is actually r sin theta. And I can take out the r commonly to get cos theta plus I sin theta. And we learned now that this piece I can just write as cis. The c for the x value, the c for the cos, the s for the sin, and the I for my imaginary. So I can rewrite that as r cis theta. Just a reminder that we're now working in radians, ons werk in radiale. So in my cos tabelletjie, I don't have 180 minus theta, I have pi minus theta, or I have pi plus theta because we're now working in radians. Just keep that in mind. One of the first questions they're going to ask us is to be able to convert from a rectangular form to polar form. With the rectangular one, the one that we know about, our grade 10 one, polar form is the one with the cis. So there are 2 methods to do this algebraically, or if you have the white scientific calculator, the Casio plus 2, that's the white one, we can use the calculator, which is going to make it much easier. Here is our method. Make sure it is in radians. Make sure you have complex mode on. So you're going to say shift mode complex. So just press mode, complex, and it's already in complex mode. You should see those letters on the top of your calculator. Now I can literally press in -1 minus I. There's an I button on your calculator. It's usually in purple. Press equal. Now I can go to shift and I press the complex button as your number 2 button. So the number 2 button, number 1 is for stats, number 2 is for complex, and there's a few options. You're going to choose option 3. Wanneer by option 3 kom, dan gee hy vir jou die R en dan gee vir jou die theta. It's going to give you the R and the angle. For example, if you type in this -1, -I into your calculator, it's going to give you something that looks like this. So that means square root 2 is my R value, cis, and my angle is the one over here. They gave you a negative angle. You can make it positive by adding 2 pi. Remember, we can add 360 anytime to an angle. If I don't like negative angles, we can add 360, which is the same as 2 pi. In alpha maths, it's okay to leave your answer in negative angles. So you can have square root 2, cis, -3 pi over 4. That is also sufficient. So changing from rectangular to polar, it's just calculator work. Same thing to go from rectangular or polar to exponential. Also for exponential, I need the R and I need the theta. That exact same buttons on the calculator will give you the R and it will give you the angle in theta. So now I've just put my R. After I have this, I can just take, well, that is still my R and my angle is still my angle. Meaning, this is exponential form over here. R I get from the calculator, it tells you 2 square root 2. Theta I get from the calculator, it tells me negative pi over 4. And yes, you can make it positive if need to, but you do not have to do that. Last one is to go from polar back to exponential, or back to rectangular. Go from polar back to rectangular. On your calculator, we're still in complex mode. I'm going to press the square root 2, and then I'm going to say shift. There's a button that looks like this. It says RCL. Shift above the RCL. There's some funny button. Shift that button, and you fill in the angle equal sign. And your calculator, if it's in complex mode, if you have the white calculator, it will give you the answer. So I put in this, I press that button, I fill in the angle, and it should give you the answer. So changing from one to another, I just put it into the calculator. Next part of the work, we're going to do some calculations, and most of the time I want it to be in polar form. So if they're asking you calculations and it's not in polar form, go and convert it first to polar form. Maak seker dat jy eers jou vergelykings en jou uitdrukkings in poolvorm skryf sodat jy die berekeninge kan toepas. Our first one is multiplication. If I have r cis theta, r cis beta, the multiplication law says I'm multiplying the two r values and I'm adding the angles. For example, if I have 2 cis pi over 3 times 5 cis pi over 4, the 2 and the 5 is going to be multiplied to 10, and the angles pi over 3, pi over 4, I'm adding, and I'm going to get 7 pi over 12. If I go to division, my rule says I'm dividing the two r values, and I'm subtracting the angles from each other, top minus bottom. So in case this one, 6 cis pi over 3 divided by 2 cis pi over 4, 6 divided by 2, that's going to be 3. And when I divide angles, I'm going to subtract top minus bottom. Your answer is going to be 3 cis pi over 12. Last one that we put in every exam, we call it the Moivre's theorem, where I have an exponent, so to the power of, and I can mark it. My law says I have to give it to the r to the power of the exponent, and I'm going to multiply that exponent with my angle. For example, 3 cis pi over 2 in brackets squared. The Moivre says I have to square the r, 3, and I have to multiply the angle with that 2. So 3 squared is 9, and if I multiply the angle, I get 2 pi over 3. And that is your basic calculations. Just note, I need to change it into polar form before I do any of the sums. Here's a few examples. So if I were to multiply, and now I have to multiply the R values, 1 times 4 is 4, and I have to add my angles. Here I'm multiplying, so I'm multiplying the R values, and I'm adding the angles. I'm going to get 6 cis 11 pi. I'm going to get 6 cis negative 11 pi over 12. For number C, if I'm dividing my R values, and the angles I'm going to subtract top minus bottom. And I'm getting 4 over 3, 7 pi over 12. Same for this one. 2 divided by 1 is 2 cis, and I'm going to subtract the angles top minus bottom, and I can just simplify that. At number F, we're seeing the Moivre's theorem. The Moivre's theorem says I have to square the 3, and I have to take that 2 and multiply with the angle. So you're going to get 9 cis negative pi over 2. If I were to maybe look at the harder one, like number H, I can first simplify the inside, where I'm dividing. We know I have to divide the R values, and I have to subtract top minus bottom. Negative becomes a positive, and the Moivre says I can give this exponent to the R value, and I have to multiply it with my angle. I'm going to say half to the power of 6, and inside I am multiplying the 6 with the angle. 1 over 6 to the 1 over 2 to the power of 6 is going to be 1 over 64 cis 7 pi. And that was lesson 1. Lesson 2, we started with the roots of complex numbers. So there are more than one way to do it. I'm going to show you a different way, in my opinion, an easier way, but here is the formula that you can use. So to get the root, we have to follow the following method. We said I'm going to write it in polar form. Jy gaan altyd eers in poolvorm skryf. Dan moet ek my aantal hoeke gaan kry. Hoe kry ek 'n nuwe hoek? How do I get a new angle? I'm going to add 2 pi. Ek gaan elke keer 360 by plus. Ek gaan 2 pi plus 2 pi by plus. If I'm maybe looking for the 4th root, as ek vir die 4de magwortel soek, then I'm going to need 4 angles. So of course like 4 hoeke, then I'm going to do that 4 times because I need at least 4 angles. I'm also going to divide each angle by n, and divide each angle by 4 in this case, and there should be 4 angles in total. I also need to find my value r, which is going to be the 4th root in this case, and I'll just write down my answers. Let's look at examples because I know that looks confusing. There's a lot of words. Let's just look at example. They asking me to get the third root of that thing, of 5 cis 5 pi over 4. So I need to get the third root of this value over here. Since I'm looking for the third root, I need 3 answers. So step 1, we said I need to go and get, I need to determine all my angles. So my first angle would be 5 pi over 4. My second angle would be 5 pi over 4 plus 2 pi, because I'm adding 360 degrees later, I'm adding 2 pi later, so you're going to get 13 pi over 4. And then I'm going to add 2 pi again, I get 21 pi over 4. I also have to divide each of these angles with 3. Why 3? They ask for the third root. So my angles is actually 5 pi over 12 13 pi over 12 and 21 pi over 12. So I have my three angles. Then I also need my R value. My R value in this case was 5 and I need the third root of 5. Now I have my angles. Here they are. I have R. I can now put it into the answer. So the answer would be this R value, cis of my first angle. That's going to be our first one. This R value, cis of my second angle, is going to be our second root. And our third one is going to be our R value, cis of my third angle. That's going to be my third root. And that's the concept. I'm getting it in polar form. I'm getting my three angles. How do I get the angle? I add 2 pi and I remember to divide with how many there are. In this case it was third root, so I divided with 3. I have my three angles and I have R getting the third root and I just put in my answers. So for example, if I say determine the sixth root of this, step 1 is to put that negative 8 into polar form. So it's on your calculator, you're going to press negative 8 equal, shift, complex, that 2 button, and it's going to give you 8 angle pi. So we know that it's actually 8 cis pi. So this is my sum to start with. This is my equation. What do we need? We need the sixth root of that. So I start with my angle. My first angle is pi. Then I add 2 pi. Then I add 2 pi. Then I add 2 pi. Also, for each of these angles, I'm going to divide with 6 because they're asking for the sixth root. So I'm getting my angles where I add 2 pi and divide by 6. Add another 2 pi and divide by 6. So my angle is going to be pi over 6 for the first one, pi over 2 for the second one, and so on. I'm doing that at least 6 times because I need 6 angles. Also, I need the R value. How do I do that? I'm going to take the sixth root of whatever R is at the moment. R at the moment is 8. Sixth root of 8 is just square root 2. And I can put in all my answers. So I have R cis of my first angle, R cis of my second angle, R cis of my third angle, all the way up to my sixth angle. Then just an interesting fact, if I were to go and plot this on an x-axis, I were to graphically go and plot it, all of these values, Z1, Z2, all of these roots, it's going to form a perfect circle with a radius of R, with a radius in this case of square root 2, and all of these angles is going to be exactly kan ewe ver van mekaar af wees. It's going to be the same length apart. It's going to cut the circle in exactly even 6 wedges. And that is the idea. If you look at a few examples, I can ask you what's the fifth root of this. Step 1 is to put it into polar form. Of dit eers in poolvorm gaan skryf. Then I get my 5 angles. How do I get the angles? I add 2 pi and I divide with 5. I do that for 5 times. I add 2 pi, add another 2 pi. I get my R value, which is the fifth root. And I just write down the answer. And over here, they also wanted your answer in exponential form. Here they say write 5 plus 12 in polar form and determine the cubed root. So they're asking me for the cubed root of this. Step 1, put it in polar form, and so on. Here they want the fourth root of that, put it first into polar form. If I look at number D, it looks a bit different. I have x squared plus 64, and they want the root of that value. To get the root of that value, take the 64 over, and I'm going to take the square root. So we actually want the square root of negative 64. So negative 64, we have to put into polar form, which is the same as 64 cis pi. And now from there, I can get my 2 angles because they want the square root. I want the square root, so I only need 2 angles. So my one angle was divided by 2. My other angle is pi plus 2 pi is 3 pi divided by 2. My R value is going to be the square root of 64, which is just 8. So my answer is going to be, my first one is going to be 8 cis pi over 2. And my second answer is going to be 8 cis 3 pi over 2. So we need to be able to convert from rectangular to polar. We need to be able to convert from polar to exponential and from polar back to rectangular. Also, we need to do calculations. That's where I add the angles or subtract the angles. And the last question, they want you to be able to determine the root of complex numbers.